Imagine rushing to build this massive stockpile of advanced missiles, right, to deter your biggest global rival. But then you realize that the raw materials you need to build those exact missiles are, well, they're almost entirely controlled by that exact same rival.
Yeah, it's quite the paradox.
It really is. And welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We have an incredibly intense journey ahead of us today.
We really do.
Because we are unpacking a geopolitical landscape where, I mean, the fundamental rules of engagement are just being rewritten in real time.
Right, right. The architectural blueprints of global alliances are seemingly being torn up and drafted anew, basically.
Exactly. And if you're sitting there with us today listening to this, it's because you want to understand the tectonic shifts happening beneath all these daily headlines.
Right. You want the context.
Right. So our mission today is to navigate this highly charged, incredibly complex set of interlocking crises. And we're drawing from an extensive analysis recently provided by a former CIA official.
And, this really requires a specific kind of analytical lens.
Yeah.
Because we are dealing with raw unfolding history here. It's not, settled fact yet.
No, not at all. Which actually, that brings up a vital disclaimer for you, our listener, before we really dive into the deep end of this material.
Yeah, this is important.
It is. So the perspective we are analyzing today contains some intensely political, highly controversial claims about the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East.
Very charged stuff.
Extremely. We are going to be looking at stark allegations of genocide, unprovoked territorial aggression, and, systemic, deeply rooted corruption within the global defense apparatus.
Right.
And our job here is absolutely not to take a side or, to validate these claims as objective truth.
No, not at all.
Instead, we are going to impartially report on these viewpoints. We want to help you understand the core arguments, the strategic calculus, and the deeply held grievance structures that this former official is presenting.
Exactly. Without endorsing any particular faction.
Right.
Because to truly grasp the mechanics of a conflict, you have to inhabit the psychological reality of the actors involved. Regardless of whether you personally agree with their framing, you have to see the board the way they see the board.
So let's look at how that board is being rearranged. Because while the broader Middle East is currently dominated by these, immediate kinetic conflicts, there is a massive long-term strategic play happening quietly in the background.
Yeah, there really is.
We are looking at a brand new mutual security arrangement. And this was signed by Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey.
Right.
The analysis refers to this as the Mecca Agreement. And what stands out isn't just the sheer military weight of these three nations combining forces.
No, it's the geography.
Exactly, the geographical messaging of where this ink was actually put to paper.
Right, because the location is the message here.
Yeah.
In the traditional, bureaucratic world of Gulf diplomacy, a Saudi-led initiative of this magnitude, while normally it would be signed in Riyadh. Of course. You'd have the state television cameras, right?
Yeah, the palatial backdrops, the standard political pageantry, all of that.
But they didn't do that.
No. By choosing to sign this in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam, they are deliberately elevating this from a mere regional treaty to a profound cultural and religious statement.
Wow. Yeah.
They are bypassing the standard secular diplomatic channels, and they're speaking directly to the global Islamic population.
So it's a signal.
Exactly. It is a signal that this alliance is rooted in something much deeper than just, transient political convenience.
And the Turkish foreign minister he was remarkably blunt about the ambitions here, wasn't he?
He really was, yeah.
He explicitly invoked an Article 5 style framework, like the core principle of collective defense.
Right, the NATO model.
Exactly, the NATO model. And the preparation for this wasn't some, reactionary scramble to a recent headline.
No, not at all.
The timeline provided in the analysis shows this was the culmination of months of highly guarded, intense diplomatic and military preparation.
With foundational groundwork laid during prior meetings in Cairo and Switzerland.
Which tells us this is a calculated structural shift.
Right.
But, it's interesting because the Turkish foreign minister was also incredibly careful to frame this strictly as a defensive organization.
Yeah. He really hammered that point home.
He went out of his way to state that neither Iran nor Israel is the designated target of this pact.
Right. And that immediately raises, the multi-billion-dollar question.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you form an Article 5-style Islamic defense pact, and you explicitly state that the region's primary Shia power and the region's primary Western-backed power are not the targets.
Right.
Who exactly are you building a collective deterrent against?
Well, the former CIA official's analysis extrapolates on this ambiguity, and it presents a highly provocative theory.
Okay.
The ultimate target might not be any of the regional actors currently dominating the headlines.
Really?
Yeah, the target, in the long term, might actually be the United States.
Wait, really? So they're preparing a collective deterrent against Western military intervention?
Yes, exactly. The argument being presented is that these nations are looking, 10, 20 years down the line.
Okay.
They have watched decades of Western regime change, interventions, and shifting security guarantees, and they are essentially attempting to build a regional fortress.
A fortress?
Yeah. It is a mechanism to ensure that future military interventions by external superpowers carry an unacceptably high collective cost.
Wow.
And they are actively looking to scale this fortress too. The Turkish and Pakistani officials heavily implied that the doors are open for expansion.
Right.
The analysis points to the very real prospect of bringing in Egypt, Qatar, or the United Arab Emirates.
And adding the UAE would fundamentally change the gravity of this pact, right?
Oh, massively.
Given their outsized economic leverage and their highly modernized, deeply integrated military apparatus.
Definitely.
But, there's a glaring omission here.
Yeah.
And that's Iran. If the goal is a unified Islamic defense pact, leaving out the dominant Shia power seems, counterintuitive to the whole messaging of unity.
Well, integrating Iran is the ultimate geopolitical friction point here.
You imagine.
The analysis acknowledges that bringing Tehran into the fold would require healing incredibly deep generational wounds between the Gulf states and the Islamic Republic.
That's putting it lightly.
Right. But consider the strategic implication. If Iran were eventually invited in, and if they actually accepted—
Is a big if.
a huge if.
Yeah.
But if they did, it would signal that this alliance has definitively transcended the centuries-old Sunni-Shia divide.
Wow.
It would mean the entire region has decided that a unified front against external Western powers supersedes their internal proxy-driven conflicts.
I hear that, but I have to push back on the functional reality of this, though. Because let's look at the mechanics of an unprovoked attack in the modern Middle East. It sounds like setting up a neighborhood watch, but no one is quite sure if they're watching for burglars or forming a militia to challenge the local police.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Thanks.
Yeah.
If this is purely defensive, how do they define an unprovoked attack in a region defined almost entirely by non-state actors?
Right.
Deniable proxy militias, cyber warfare, economic blockades. How does a traditional collective defense treaty actually trigger in a landscape where nobody declares war, but literally everyone is fighting?
Well, that ambiguity is exactly the Achilles heel of these agreements. And the former official's framework provides a perfect historical counterexample to illustrate this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Just last September, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan signed a defense pact with remarkably similar collective defense language.
So like a trial run for this Mecca agreement.
Essentially, yes, a trial run. But here's the thing. When Saudi Arabia was subsequently attacked by Houthi rebels operating out of Yemen, Pakistan did not mobilize. They did not come to Riyadh's aid.
I see. Because the Houthis are technically a non-state militia.
Exactly.
So Pakistan likely looked at this situation and decided that a drone strike by a rebel group didn't constitute a conventional state-on-state unprovoked attack.
Right. Not something that would trigger a massive military deployment on their end.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, the analysis points out the timeline of aggression. Because Saudi Arabia initiated its intensive involvement against the Houthis through a massive, devastating blockade.
Which is pretty severe.
Right, and under international law, a blockade is widely considered an act of war.
Oh, right.
So if you establish a blockade and the opposing militia fires back, is that an unprovoked attack on you?
That's a blurry line.
Exactly. Or is it a retaliation to your initial aggression? If you throw the first punch economically, do you get to call Article 5 when you get hit kinetically?
Yeah, that's a really messy legal gray area.
Yeah, it is. Until the specific granular text of the Mecca Agreement is actually published and tested in the real world, its actual enforceability remains highly, highly theoretical.
Okay, so on one hand, we have these sweeping architectural frameworks trying to secure the region over the next 2 decades. But while they are drafting treaties in Mecca, a much more immediate physical choke point is rapidly tightening in the Persian Gulf right now
Right, very immediate.
because Iran is actively testing the boundaries of regional deterrence right now in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, and the Strait of Hormuz is basically the central nervous system of the global energy economy.
Yeah, it really is.
A massive percentage of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through this shipping lane. And at its narrowest point, it's only a couple of miles wide for deep-water vessels.
Which is terrifying from a logistics standpoint. And the analysis notes that Iran is reportedly considering weaponizing this geographic reality in a highly unconventional way.
Yeah, by imposing a transit fee.
Right, a 5 to 7% transit fee on international shipping.
Which is just, the mechanics of how they would enforce that are mind-boggling.
How would they even do it?
Well, we aren't just talking about, like, a toll booth on the water. Enforcement would require the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy to aggressively board non-compliant vessels.
Yeah.
Or, alternatively, it would require global insurance syndicates in London to fundamentally rewrite maritime premiums for the entire region.
Which would be hugely expensive.
The shockwaves through global energy markets would be instantaneous and catastrophic for inflation.
But, the transit fee is almost a distraction from the larger diplomatic bombshell here.
That's true.
Because the Iran Supreme National Security Council has issued a statement outlining 6 strict prerequisites.
Right.
And these must be met before they will even consider reopening the strait to normal, unharassed traffic.
Yeah.
We really need to look closely at these demands because, as the analysis points out, they are completely changing the negotiating posture.
They absolutely are.
Let's group them by their strategic intent, actually, because first we have the military and logistical demands.
Okay.
They demand an immediate end to the naval blockade and the total withdrawal of U.S. naval and air forces from the area surrounding Iran.
Right. So this is a demand for the complete dismantling of the U.S. forward operating posture.
Which is huge.
It's massive. The perspective presented in the analysis interprets this as Iran seeking to completely eliminate the possibility of a decapitation strike or a surprise kinetic attack, while negotiations are allegedly ongoing.
Oh, I see.
They want the refueling aircraft grounded. They want the carrier strike groups pushed completely over the horizon.
Yeah.
And they want the logistical tether severed entirely. They're basically demanding physical breathing room.
Okay, so that's the military side. Then you have the economic demands.
Right.
They are requiring the lifting of all, quote, cruel and illegal sanctions, coupled with the immediate release of frozen and stolen Iranian assets.
And while lifting sanctions has been, a baseline Iranian demand for decades, tying it explicitly as a prerequisite for maritime transit completely changes the leverage dynamic here.
How so?
Well, they aren't asking for sanctions relief in exchange for, say, slowing down uranium enrichment anymore.
Right.
They are demanding liquidity simply to allow the global economy to function without interference. It's a completely different bargaining chip.
That makes sense. But the demand that truly reorients the geopolitical map, in my opinion, is the fifth one.
Yeah, this is the big one.
They are demanding an end to all aggression against Iran's allies. And they explicitly list Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
Packaging this with the economic and military demands seems designed to create an impossible situation for Washington.
It is a profound strategic evolution. Because in previous decades, issues regarding Palestinian statehood or the status of southern Lebanon were sequestered into separate long-term diplomatic tracks.
Right. There were separate issues entirely.
Exactly. But by explicitly linking the daily operational security of the Strait of Hormuz to an immediate cessation of hostilities in Gaza and the West Bank, Iran is essentially attempting to force the United States to dictate terms to Israel.
Wow. And then the final demand is for the payment of damages for 2 aggressive wars imposed against Iran.
Right.
So when you look at this entire package, it forces a critical question about Tehran's actual intent.
It certainly does.
Are these 6 points meant to be a genuine, hardline starting point for a diplomatic off-ramp? Or is this a calculated poison pill?
A poison pill.
Yeah, a list so completely unpalatable to Washington that is designed to be rejected from the start, giving Iran a tailored pretext to keep the strait restricted while blaming the U.S. for the resulting global economic fallout.
Well, the former CIA official's framework wrestles directly with that exact tension.
Yeah.
Because these are no longer the end goals of a comprehensive peace treaty. They are the stated prerequisites for simply returning to the status quo.
Which is wild.
Right. And this places the U.S. in a strategic vice.
Because what can they even do?
Well, Washington must either accept terms that would be viewed domestically as a complete capitulation,
Which won't happen.
right, or they watch the global economy suffer deeply from energy inflation. Or, the third option, they pivot back to an active, kinetic war footing to forcefully open the strait.
And there are visible indicators that the military apparatus is actually preparing for that latter option, right?
There are, yes.
The analysis highlights a very specific logistical movement regarding U.S. Central Command.
Right, CNTCOM. Personnel who were previously scheduled for routine leave are reportedly having those orders canceled.
Wow.
And they are being recalled. And, in the mechanics of military deployment, you do not recall troops from leave, disrupting unit cohesion and family lives if you genuinely believe a diplomatic breakthrough is on the horizon.
Of course not.
It is a very clear operational signal that the U.S. military is bracing for friction. They are anticipating that deterrence might fail.
Interestingly, there is a complex secondary negotiation happening quietly in the background here, too.
Yeah, with Oman.
Right. While Iran is stonewalling the U.S., they are simultaneously working with Oman to negotiate a temporary alternative maritime route.
And Oman's role here is fascinating. It's historically unprecedented, really.
Because they're usually the neutral party, right?
Exactly. Oman has always been the quiet, neutral mediator of the Gulf. They're like the Switzerland of the Middle East.
Yeah.
They've maintained channels with Tehran when absolutely no one else would. Yet the analysis points out that for the first time, Oman has publicly and explicitly condemned the attacks on civilian ships in the strait,
Really? That's a huge shift.
citing violations of international law.
Yeah. Oman is feeling immense, crushing pressure from Western capitals to secure the shipping lanes,
Makes sense.
but they are still desperately trying to leverage their historical relationship with Iran to engineer a technical bypass route, basically to prevent a total economic freeze. Which brings us back to the interconnected nature of all these crises. Because Iran's fifth demand requiring a halt to actions against its allies in Lebanon and Palestine, it proves that you cannot decouple the shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf from the physical borders of Israel.
No, they are fundamentally linked.
Right. Israel is currently running a massive multi-front military calculus, and the internal dynamics are shifting rapidly.
Yeah. The analysis dives deeply into recent reporting from Israeli media, specifically Channel 12 and 13, to really understand the debates happening within Israel's security establishment right now.
There seem to be two tracks operating simultaneously, from what I gather. On one hand, security chiefs are reportedly discussing the mechanics of limited IDF withdrawals from within the Gaza Strip.
Right. And this points to a cold acknowledgement of the grinding, attritional reality of urban warfare.
Yeah.
It suggests a tactical desire to lower the operational tempo on the southern front, perhaps transitioning to targeted raids rather than trying to hold vast swaths of dense urban terrain.
But then, on the broader regional track, those same reports indicate that Israel is actively drafting and updating plans for independent, unilateral military strikes against Iran,
Right.
and specifically without U.S. participation or coordination.
And the driving force behind this, according to the analysis, is a deep-seated fear within the Israeli defense establishment
A fear of what?
that Washington is desperately seeking any available diplomatic exit ramp to avoid a broader regional war.
Oh, I see.
The Israeli strategic doctrine relies entirely on overwhelming deterrence. So if the perception takes root that the U.S. is stepping back, Israel feels compelled to maintain the credible threat of unilateral, devastating action against Tehran.
Just to prevent their adversaries from feeling emboldened.
Exactly.
Yet while Gaza burns and Iran looms, the most immediate combustible flashpoint identified in the analysis is the northern border. It's Lebanon.
Yeah, the northern front is incredibly tense.
Israel is reportedly pushing hard for a completely new paradigm in southern Lebanon. They're advocating for a multinational peacekeeping force, potentially led by Switzerland, to entirely replace the current United Nations force, UNIFIL.
Right, and to understand why Israel views the UN as a failed mechanism there, we really have to look closely at the history and the physical reality of UN Resolution 1701.
Right. This was the framework that ended the brutal 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah.
Yes, exactly. Under 1701, a ceasefire was established, and Hezbollah technically agreed to the terms set by the Lebanese government,
Okay.
which mandated the disarmament of armed groups south of the Litani River.
Right.
But the geography is absolutely crucial here. The Litani River runs parallel to the Israeli border. It's roughly 18 miles north of it in most places.
Okay, so there's an 18-mile buffer zone.
Right. The mandate was to keep that 18-mile buffer zone completely free of Hezbollah fighters and advanced weaponry.
But the analysis points out that Hezbollah interpreted this mandate through an incredibly narrow, almost non-existent lens.
Yeah, completely ignored the spirit of it.
They deeply embedded their forces, their anti-tank guided missiles, and their short-range rocket arsenals directly into the civilian infrastructure of southern Lebanon, right up against the UN Blue Line.
Exactly. So, from the Israeli perspective, UNIFIL completely failed its core mandate.
Yeah.
It became an observer force rather than an enforcement mechanism, just watching Hezbollah build an unprecedented arsenal while hiding behind the shield of international diplomacy.
Right. And this is where we really need to address the fiercely critical viewpoints presented by the former CIA official regarding Israel's motivations.
Yes, this is a very important part of the analysis.
Because the analysis does not view Israel's actions in Lebanon simply as a reaction to Hezbollah's presence.
No, not at all. The framework presented in the analysis uses some highly charged rhetoric to describe Israel's regional posture.
Right.
The source material accuses Israel of operating as a, quote, hungry locust.
A hungry locust, wow.
Driven by an inherent desire to continuously expand its territorial footprint.
So the argument being that the conflict with Hezbollah is less about border security and more of a manufactured pretext to degrade Lebanese infrastructure, destroy cultural and Christian sites, and project power northward.
That is the argument presented, yes.
The analysis goes so far as to assert that Hezbollah would not even exist today if it weren't a direct, organic reaction to Israel's previous invasion and occupation of southern Lebanon back in 1982.
Right. It is a framing that completely rejects the prevalent Western narrative.
Yeah, very different.
The Western narrative usually frames Hezbollah as merely an unprovoked synthetic proxy wholly controlled by Tehran.
Right.
But this perspective positions them as an indigenous resistance movement born directly out of military occupation.
Wow.
And understanding this perspective is absolutely vital because it explains why the conflict is so deeply intractable.
Because the core motivations are seen so differently.
Exactly. If a population believes their adversary is an expansionist force bent on territorial conquest and cultural erasure, well, no external peacekeeping force will ever convince them to lay down their weapons.
Which makes me question the fundamental logic of the Swiss proposal, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a fair question.
If the original UN mandate, under Resolution 1701, backed by thousands of international troops, totally failed to disarm the region, why would a new Swiss-led peacekeeping force be anything more than a theoretical band-aid on a gaping geopolitical wound?
Right.
I mean, how do you legislate away a deeply entrenched militia?
Well, according to the analysis, you can't. The perspective here is that these diplomatic proposals completely ignore the sociological and political realities on the ground.
Yeah.
Because Hezbollah is not just a militia hiding in the woods, they are a de facto government in the south.
Right. They run everything.
They provide the social services, the education, the health care, the employment that the central Lebanese government completely fails to deliver. They are deeply embedded in the constitutional parliamentary system of the country. So a Swiss peacekeeping mandate cannot dismantle a socio-political ecosystem.
That's a really stark reality. And the analysis also dives into a fascinating theory regarding Israel's broader strategic goals.
Oh, yes.
Specifically, how they might try to manipulate the relationship between the Arab Gulf states and Iran.
Right. The theory presented is that Israel might be deliberately attempting to orchestrate a scenario that drives a permanent wedge between the Gulf and Tehran.
Okay, how so?
The calculus goes like this. If Israel launches a highly provocative unilateral strike against Iranian assets, they might hope that Iran's retaliation isn't directed solely at Israel.
So it spills over.
Exactly, but spills over into the Gulf. If Iran were to strike energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, it would immediately force those Gulf nations into a hardline, formalized alliance with Israel and the U.S. against a common Iranian threat.
But the analysis strongly doubts Iran would take that bait.
Right. Iran's strategic patience is very well documented. The analysis speculates that if Israel strikes, Iran would calibrate its response with extreme precision. They would likely engage in what military strategists call horizontal escalation.
Let's define that, actually, because it's a crucial concept.
Yeah.
What is horizontal escalation?
Sure. So horizontal escalation means expanding a conflict into different geographic theaters, or using different domains of warfare rather than just hitting back harder in the same exact spot.
Okay.
So, for example, if Israel bombs a facility in Tehran, Iran might not bomb Tel Aviv directly.
Right.
Instead, they might activate proxy militias to attack U.S. logistics hubs in Iraq,
Oh, I see.
or launch massive cyber attacks against Israeli water infrastructure, or increase the harassment of shipping in the Red Sea.
Right, coming at it sideways.
Exactly. But crucially, the analysis argues they would deliberately avoid striking the Gulf states.
Because they want to keep them neutral.
Yes, they want to keep the Gulf states neutral or quietly aligned against Israeli aggression. They do not want to push them into Washington's arms.
There's a caveat to that restraint, though, isn't there?
There is, yeah. The only scenario where Iran lashes out indiscriminately against regional energy infrastructure is if Israel achieves an overwhelming, catastrophic military success.
Like what?
Like completely crippling Iran's command and control or completely destroying their nuclear program.
Okay.
Leaving Iran feeling it has absolutely no other options but to burn down the entire regional economy to force a global intervention.
Wow.
But that is the absolute worst-case apocalyptic scenario.
So whether we are talking about a regional war, a horizontally escalated proxy conflict, or securing maritime choke points, every single one of these strategies relies on one fundamental physical reality.
Right.
Military hardware.
Yep.
You need Patriot interceptors, you need guided munitions, you need destroyers. And the most alarming revelation in this entire analysis is that the superpower supplying one side of this equation is running dangerously low on inventory.
Yes. We have to transition from the theater of war to the logistics of war now. We are looking at a critical structural vulnerability here, the readiness and capacity of the U.S. military-industrial base.
Right, because the analysis pulls from New York Times reporting, corroborated by a leaked, highly urgent Pentagon memo from Deputy Secretary of Defense Feinberg, indicating that the ongoing multi-front conflicts in the Middle East have severely depleted U.S. weapon stockpiles.
It is basically a zero-sum game of logistics at this point.
Yeah.
To feed the relentless demand for air defense interceptors in the Middle East, the Pentagon is being forced to draw down supplies from critical theaters in Europe and the Indo-Pacific.
Which is terrifying.
It is. The analysis highlights that this cannibalization of resources is causing immense quiet panic among senior officials.
I can imagine.
Because it leaves Washington visibly and quantifiably less prepared for potential major power conflicts with Russia or China.
Let's look at the Feinberg memo specifically, because the timeline it demands is just staggering.
It's unbelievable. Deputy Secretary Feinberg's memo gives U.S. defense contractors exactly 21 days to submit proposals.
21 days.
Yeah. For faster deliveries, expanded production capacity, and accelerated manufacturing for critical weapons systems, specifically focusing on Patriot air defense interceptors.
Right.
He uses incredibly blunt language in the memo, stating explicitly that, quote, years-long development cycles are not acceptable.
I mean, giving a massive defense contractor 21 days to fix a systemic industrial shortfall is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's a tall order.
It's like a head chef screaming for a 20-minute rush order on a complex banquet, completely ignoring the fact that he outsourced his prep kitchen, his supply trucks, and his farmers to his biggest competitor 10 years ago.
That's a very apt analogy.
You can demand speed, but you can't defy the physics of a broken supply chain.
Well, the Pentagon is attempting to defy it with brute financial force.
Throwing money at it.
Exactly. The analysis mentions a massive $58 billion framework agreement deployed with Lockheed Martin, essentially trying to flood the zone with capital to force an acceleration in production.
But money doesn't instantly build factories or train specialized machinists.
No, it doesn't.
And the strain of this logistical reality is causing massive internal friction within the U.S. military command structure itself.
Oh, absolutely. We are seeing unprecedented high-level pushback that rarely makes it into the public eye.
Yeah.
The analysis notes that senior military officials commanding forces in Europe are actively resisting orders to send more regional assets, such as guided missile destroyers, to plug the gaps in the Middle East.
And the analysis highlights a very specific, quiet leadership shakeup regarding this, right?
It does.
Lieutenant General Charles Costanza, a 3-star general who is deeply involved in coordinating the logistical support for Ukraine out of Poland. He was abruptly relieved of his command early with zero public explanation.
Right. And the implication presented in the analysis is that General Costanza pushed back too hard against the reprioritization of assets away from the European theater.
Wow.
When you start abruptly relieving 3-star generals on NATO's front line, it is a glaring indicator of the extreme systemic stress the military apparatus is under.
And that stress isn't just felt in the Pentagon or by 3-star generals. It is cascading down to the basic granular logistics, failing the personnel actually deployed on the ground, or in this case, on the water.
Yes. The analysis shares a deeply telling anecdote about a highly contentious town hall meeting.
Oh, right, with the Secretary of the Navy.
Exactly, between the Secretary of the Navy and the families of sailors deployed on the USS Tripoli.
And the core issue, there wasn't some debate over grand strategy. It was that the sailors literally weren't getting their mail.
Yeah.
And the food rations they were receiving were reportedly substandard and degrading.
Which, sounds like a minor administrative issue to some people.
Sure.
Until you understand the mechanics of morale on a long-term naval deployment.
Right.
When supply lines are stretched so thin and the operational tempo is kept incredibly high to maintain deterrence in the region, the logistics train really struggles to provide the absolute basics of sustenance and connection to home.
Yeah, the basics just fall apart.
And when families push back against the command structure about this, the standard excuse given is that they are operating in a wartime environment.
Right.
But as the former CIA official cynically observes in the analysis, the U.S. is not officially in a world war.
Yeah.
This is simply a failure of logistical prioritization and supply chain management.
Which brings me back to my analogy about the chef who outsourced his prep kitchen to his rival.
Right.
Because this leads us into what is perhaps the deepest, most structural irony of the entire U.S. supply chain crisis highlighted in the analysis.
The rare earths.
Exactly. To build these Patriot interceptors, to speed up this production, like Deputy Secretary Feinberg is demanding so urgently, U.S. defense companies desperately need specific, highly specialized materials.
Right. We are talking about rare earth minerals.
Yeah.
Elements like neodymium and praseodymium, which are absolutely critical for the high-powered magnets used in the guidance systems, the radar arrays, and the fin actuators of advanced missiles.
And who controls the vast, overwhelming majority of the global rare earth mineral supply chain?
Yeah.
From the raw mining to the complex metallurgical refining.
China.
So let's just trace the logic here because it's wild.
It really is.
The United States is rapidly depleting its advanced weapons stockpiles to manage conflicts in the Middle East. It desperately wants to rebuild those stockpiles to prepare for a potential looming conflict with China in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
But to physically build the weapons required to deter China, it has to buy the refined raw materials directly from China.
It is a strategic paradox of the highest order.
It's insane.
The analysis highlights this profound absurdity. The U.S. government maintains highly antagonistic diplomatic policies, aggressive technology tariffs, and broad economic sanctions against China,
Right.
while simultaneously relying entirely on Chinese industrial supply chains to fuel the core capabilities of its own military-industrial base.
But, the critique from the former official goes much deeper than just the origin of the raw materials, doesn't it?
It does.
It is a fundamental indictment of the physics and the politics of how the U.S. defense industry actually manufactures these weapons once the materials actually arrive.
Yes.
Let's look at the PAC-3 missile, for example. It's a highly advanced, incredibly expensive interceptor.
Right. The analysis points out that the manufacturing process for a single PAC-3 missile is intentionally fractured.
Fractured.
Yeah, the production is spread across 20 to 40 different subcontractors located in various states across the entire country.
Which, from a pure engineering and manufacturing standpoint, that is wildly inefficient.
Terribly inefficient.
You are shipping delicate components back and forth across a continent, duplicating quality assurance processes, and introducing, dozens of potential bottlenecks.
Exactly.
Why would a system designed for national security tolerate that level of inefficiency?
Because, according to the analysis, it is not an engineering decision, it is purely a political one.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the U.S. defense procurement system has evolved so that members of Congress can point to manufacturing jobs in their home district.
Jobs.
Right. If the missile's guidance system is built in one state, the fuselage is milled in another, and the solid rocket propulsion is poured in a third state.
And they guarantee support.
Exactly. You mathematically guarantee that multiple senators and representatives will vote to approve the massive defense budgets required to protect those local jobs.
Wow. So it's essentially a decentralized jobs program disguised as a streamlined defense apparatus.
That's a good way to put it.
And the result is a fragile, geographically fragmented supply chain that takes years to produce what a warfighter might need in weeks.
Exactly. And the analysis directly contrasts this sprawling, politically motivated system with the defense industrial bases of Russia and China.
Right, because the analysis claims that Russia and China spend roughly 1/3 of the U.S. defense budget. Yet they are currently able to achieve incredibly high, sustained production rates for artillery and advanced munitions.
Because the mechanics of their production are fundamentally different.
Right.
They utilize consolidated, state-controlled supply chains. They build the weapon from start to finish in massive, vertically integrated factory complexes.
All in one place.
Right. They own the raw material, the refinement, the machining, and the final assembly all under one roof. Or at least within one monolithic, state-owned enterprise.
Yeah.
They do not have to navigate the competing interests of 40 different corporate subcontractors spread across multiple political jurisdictions.
Which leads to a fascinating, almost philosophical debate raised by the analysis regarding the nature of the American system itself.
It really does.
Is the U.S. defense industry a failure of capitalism?
Well, the former official argues that what we are witnessing in the defense sector isn't actually capitalism at all.
Really?
Because true capitalism requires a free market, competition, and the actual risk of failure.
Right, none of which really exist here.
Exactly. The analysis argues that the U.S. defense base is a monopolistic system plagued by, well, sweetheart deals, deeply entrenched lobbying, and a complete lack of genuine free market competition.
They specifically point to the revolving door between the highest levels of the Pentagon and corporate defense boards, don't they?
Yes, this is a major point of contention.
Because you have four-star generals retiring and almost immediately taking highly lucrative multi-million-dollar positions on the boards of the very defense contractors they used to award massive government contracts to.
Right. And the analysis argues this creates an incestuous loop that allows these companies to essentially cook the books on the inside.
Oh.
It ensures their profit margins are fiercely protected by their former colleagues still in uniform, regardless of their actual efficiency, their cost overruns, or their sluggish production speeds.
But wait, let's examine the premise of that critique for a second.
Sure.
Because can a taxpayer-funded defense sector ever truly operate on free market capitalism?
That is the core question.
Right. Or is it inherently destined to be a politically driven monopoly simply because the federal government is the one and only buyer? I mean, if there is no civilian consumer market for a Patriot missile or a nuclear submarine, you can't have true capitalist competition. You can't have 5 companies building competing aircraft carriers and hoping the open market decides which one is best.
Right. And that is the structural trap the analysis identifies.
Oh.
The U.S. has engineered a system that demands the quarterly profit margins and shareholder returns of a ruthless capitalist enterprise,
Right.
but relies entirely on the political maneuvering, guaranteed contracts, and single-buyer reality of a state-planned economy.
The worst of both worlds.
Exactly. And when that hybrid system is suddenly stressed by a real-world high-intensity conflict that demands rapid, massive scale, well, the cracks don't just show. They become structural faults that threaten the entire geopolitical posture of the country.
But we've covered an immense amount of ground today, tracing the deep fault lines of global power.
We really have.
We started by looking at how the architectural map of the Middle East is being rapidly and quietly redrawn. We examined the Mecca Agreement, unpacking the deep historical and geographic symbolism of a new, highly unpredictable Islamic defense pact that may be looking decades into the future to deter Western intervention.
Right. And then we analyzed how the immediate boundaries of that deterrence are being tested in the Strait of Hormuz,
Exactly.
breaking down the mechanics of Iran's 6 stringent demands and how they are attempting to hold the global energy economy hostage to force a realignment in Washington's relationship with Israel.
And from there, we looked closely at Israel's multi-front reality, examining the internal debates over Gaza withdrawals versus unilateral strikes on Iran, and deeply exploring the history of UN Resolution 1701 to understand why the northern border with Lebanon remains a seemingly unsolvable geopolitical puzzle.
And finally, we connected all of this regional friction back to the industrial heartland, exposing the systemic, deeply rooted supply chain rot-threatening U.S. military supremacy. A system basically paralyzed by political fragmentation and a profound, paradoxical reliance on its primary foreign adversary for the basic materials of war.
It's a landscape where the traditional load-bearing walls of global security are proving incredibly fragile.
Very fragile.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you watch these complex crises continue to unfold in the news. We spend so much time analyzing how superpowers project strength and draw red lines on the map. But when the world's established superpower realizes its ability to rapidly build the weapons of war depends almost entirely on the supply chains and raw materials of the very rival it's trying to contain. Well, who is actually deterring who? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the blueprints, keep looking at the shifting squares on the board, and keep questioning the narratives behind the news.